welcome everyone to the Detachment 538 podcast. I'm Cadet Kazarowski, joined by special guest Major Nelms today. How are you doing today, ma'am?
I'm doing great.
All right. While we get started here, why don't you tell the audience a little bit about yourself and what you do?
All right. My name is Joanna Nelms. My call sign is Booster. I'm a major right now, active duty U.S. Air Force. I came in on a health professions scholarship when I was fresh out of Texas A&M University back in 2006, and I am a flight surgeon.
Gotcha. And you mentioned the nickname Booster. That got a fun story behind it you'd want to share?
It does indeed. So my first assignment as a flight surgeon was with a B-1 squadron, the 9th Bomb Squadron, oldest bomb squadron in the United States Air Force. And the time came around to name me as a young new flight surgeon and part of the team. And while you can't tell from a podcast, I'm not a real tall human. And so when I was flying in the Mighty Bone, I had to struggle sometimes to reach some switches. And so, they're kind of got a joke around of that the doc needed a booster seat. And so when the time came for naming, that's what stuck. So I've proudly gone by that for a long time now.
But you mentioned the Health and Profession Scholarship is how you got to the Air Force. You mind explaining a little bit about that process and what that scholarship is?
Sure. So the Health Professions Scholarship, or as a lot of y'all hear it, is HPSP. Is a scholarship opportunity for multiple of the health specialties, not just to go to medical school. Last I checked, you can do it for, I believe, to go to physician assistant school, to do things like physical therapy. So it's definitely a great program. You apply to it while you are still in college, usually. So whether you're ROTC or not, you can apply. You're accepted by the service contingent upon your getting into whatever. So for me, when I got my acceptance to med school, that's when I officially received the scholarship. So there's some contingency there, but the process was relatively easy, even for me, as I was not a ROTC student at Texas A&M. I was a normal Civvy girl, and working with a recruiter was very helpful. It was a pretty streamlined process, all things considered. The awesome thing is I got a 4-year scholarship. It paid for 4 years of medical school, all tuition, books, living stipend. It was great. And in exchange for that, I owed back 4 years after I completed my first year as an intern, which is what you have to do to become licensed in the United States to practice medicine. And so it's a really pretty cool payback, 1-for-1, essentially.
Gotcha. And so through ROTC, obviously, you go to ROTC, then you join the military. With the Health Profession Scholarship, do you attend OTS or something like that instead?
So yes, I think they've changed the name of it since I went, but it was an abbreviated version of OTS called COT, which was Commissioned Officer Training. I was already commissioned by the time I went to my training. So I commissioned as I was leaving College Station, Texas, and then went for a 5.5-week training at Maxwell at the schoolhouse where OTS occurs. Unfortunately for us in COT, which was mainly a bunch of lawyers, chaplains, and docs, they took out all the fun parts, like shooting things and all the good obstacle courses, and they just shoved us in that auditorium and just fed us PowerPoint out of a water hose.
And you mentioned it was a pretty streamlined, simple process, but what was the application process like? Was it just filling out a couple of forms with your GPA and what you were looking to do, or is it a little more in-depth than that?
It was more in-depth than that. Now, that being said, with it stacked up against me applying for a bunch of medical schools at the same time, I found it to be more streamlined because I'd already filled out all the forms at least twice. And I think there was an essay component involved, but again, standard expectations. The hardest part was just working through the military-centric things, which for folks that are in ROTC, y'all are learning a lot of how that works. Learning about, it was through that process I had to get my MEPS exam set up. And so that was an adventure in and of itself, having a recruiter tell you that you definitely don't have allergies because they won't let you in the Air Force if you have allergies. The same things that you guys probably have already started to hear a little through DOD-MERP and some of your other stuff.
Yeah, of course. So I think that clears most of the questions up on the HPSP process. But now let's move on to your job and what kind of stuff you do. So you were a flight surgeon, correct?
Yes.
So just describe to everyone a little bit about what you do, or at least when you started, when you just got in, what were some of the things you did? Then we can branch on and talk about how it's probably changed a little bit from then. But you just got in, you're a fresh lieutenant. What was your job like, and what kind of stuff did you do?
So with the scholarship, fresh got in as a lieutenant. I went to med school for 4 years at a civilian med school. So that was fun. The interesting thing with HPSP is that you stay a second lieutenant all 4 years. So that was in and of itself a little strange. And then on the day I graduated from med school, they pinned my captain's bars on me and called me doctor for the first time. And yeah, what a rush. So from there, went and did a year of that intern year I was talking about. So I did a year of general surgery out at Travis Air Force Base in California. And so that was fun. I darn near lived in the hospital. That's what surgeons basically do, 80, 90-hour work weeks, lots of not sleeping. But then that was when I got my first flight surgeon tour. And spoiler alert, flight surgeons don't operate in the air in the back of an airplane most of the time. So, but what we do is we do primary care for pilots, special operators, and their families. And a lot of that involves not only basic medicine, but application of aerospace medicine, which means taking the principles of I'm taking a healthy young pilot and I'm putting him in a crazy environment where there's G's and where there's not a lot of oxygen, and I need him to function optimally there. And so how do I do that? How do I apply medicine? How do I apply physiology and help that pilot be everything that he needs to be to get the mission done? There's a lot of occupational medicine involved, going out and checking out shop visits, checking the paint shops where they're painting the aircraft, making sure that OSHA requirements are covered. So it's a fun field of medicine because you're not trapped in the clinic all the time. One of the best parts of being a flight surgeon in the Air Force is that you are actual rated air crew, so you're required to fly. And that's a great time as well.
So from what it sounds like, so the typical Air Force officer, they're officers first, you have the people under you and you're really focusing on your officer duties, and then maybe your job second, depending on the career field. But it seems like for flight surgeons in the medical field, it's kind of the other way around. You're working on your specialty a little bit more and using your knowledge. Is that the case, or am I misunderstanding a bit?
I think that when you look at positions in the Air Force in the broader scope, I think you will see people that have a struggle and are more, as you say, they think of themselves as a doctor first. I think of all the specialties in medicine, aerospace medicine and your operational docs like flight surgeons, we do really take that officership part seriously as well. Not to say that other doctors don't, but for us, because we interface so much with the line, because we are talking to line commanders, advising them of risk, we have to have the ability to really execute those customs and courtesies to understand how the mission works outside of our hospital building. For me personally, I've always been an officer first and then a physician. But it's definitely a very personal thing that people have a lot of opinions about.
So just to add on to that, when you first got in, you went through your lieutenant phase, you pinned on captain as soon as you, left the school. Did you have people underneath you that you were leading as an officer, or did you have to wait a little while before you had a team of people?
So when I was an intern, most of my work, even though I was stationed at Travis Air Force Base, was in a civilian hospital nearby up in Sacramento. So in a civilian situation, no, and as an intern, if you've ever seen Scrubs or any other medical show on TV, the intern is truly the bottom feeder of all food chains. But when I showed up at Dyess Air Force Base, I was stationed there with that B-1 squadron. I absolutely dumped straight into a clinic where I had a full enlisted staff. I had other young docs that came in after me, only a year after me, who I was supervising. I had civilians who I was supervising. It was a lot going on for a very young, very green captain, and it was a huge learning curve.
And what was that kind of like? Because you mentioned that you were learning, and then you become a captain, and all of a sudden you have this whole team behind you. What was that transition like, going from not really having to worry about all those things to now being thrown right into leading a bunch of people on a big team?
It was huge. And I think some of the most valuable advice that I received early on was to find that master sergeant who'd been there a long time and basically humble yourself and say, Sarge, I have no idea what I'm doing. please help me not to kill the patients. And I learned this in medicine too. You always find the nurse on the floor who's been here longer than you've been alive, and you humble yourself and you say, I know I'm the doctor, but I need you to tell me how to do this. And so it was very similar. It was finding wise enlisted folks and wise other officers who could help shepherd me along. But for me, it was a stiff learning curve. My boss, the lead flight surgeon, was deployed the first 6 months I showed up at that clinic. So I had a couple other captains who'd been there 5 minutes longer than me, and we just had to make it work.
Super interesting stuff. So a lot of people are, when they look into getting into a field, are curious about what a day in the life is like, so they can kind of get what to expect. I'm under the impression your daily life probably changes from day to day depending on the situation, but would you mind running us through a rough day in the life? You're a fresh captain. You could also talk about how it's changed from then to now, your daily life, but a little rundown of the daily life.
Sure. So a standard day as just a good old captain flight surgeon at base X is going to be, you're going to wake up, you've got clinic that probably kicks off at about 7:30 a.m. So you're going to want to get there a little early. You're going to want to have lots of coffee on hand. You're going to check in with your staff. You're going to usually you'll start your day seeing patients for return to fly or sick call, which means, hey, I had the sniffles. I needed to be down for a couple days, but I'm better now. So, doc, check my ears. I can clear them and I'm ready to go fly. So lots of quick appointments early in the morning. Then you see kind of some more of your standard bread and butter medicine throughout the day. You may only work a half day of clinic that day. You may have gotten lucky and gotten on the schedule this afternoon, and you're going to go fly in a T-38 this afternoon. Get some flight hours in, have a good debrief, maybe even hang around and drink a beverage with your pilot friends if it's late enough in the afternoon. But the great thing is that most likely about 4:30, you're packing up and heading home. And call as a flight surgeon isn't anything like call in a hospital is. Call as a flight surgeon is usually about a week at a time, and you've just got the bat phone so that if, something happens off duty or something happens late hours on the flight line, you're able to respond. And so all things considered, it's a really great lifestyle. It's one that does, on the whole, outside of just a day in the life, it's a lifestyle where you can expect to deploy. Either with your flying squadron directly, if you're a squadron medical element, or as a part of a package from the hospital itself. So it's not just all roses and family life, but it's a nice schedule, and it's not anything like that 80 to 90 hours in the hospital a week that I talked about earlier.
And did that day in the life change from captain to where you are now, or did it stay mostly the same?
The answer is yes. I ended up doing a residency in aerospace medicine, which was really cool. I got a master's in public health as a part of that and got to do some really cool rotations, got to rotate at NASA, got to go to a lot of different places, see a lot of different parts of the aerospace mission of the Air Force, as well as civilian. And so coming out of that, I basically got sent to a base to be the chief of aerospace medicine, which is a great job in and of itself. You get to run the flight medicine clinic, you run aerospace and operational physiology, you're in charge of the public health team, the bioenvironmental engineers, and usually the health professions folks that quitting smoking and things like that. So it becomes a lot more about program management, which is great. And then here at the tail end of my active duty career, I've actually been working a headquarters job for Air Education Training Command, running their medical standards. So it's been a good ride. I'm actually transitioning out to the Guard, where I'm going to get to just be a flight surgeon again, which I'm really looking forward to.
That's some awesome stuff. And you mentioned a little earlier that deployments were a part of the job. Could you talk a little bit about how often deployments are, what kind of places you can go to, and what those experiences are like?
Sure. So deployments obviously depends on what theater we're in, and who we're fighting right now, or not even fighting right now. Deployments, say with the B-1 squadron, were to Al Udeid, which is a big staging area out of the UAE. They also would deploy out to Guam, which was apparently a good time. I never got to go to either with them, but there were good stories to be had. Deploying with a medical element, it's going to often be to like a large hospital. We had a large hospital at Bagram in Afghanistan, and so there were deployments there. You also can do some humanitarian missions when we're having to fly folks out of, say, Pacific Theater. etc. We can do missions out there. It's really dependent on the unit that you're in and what the needs are at the time. If I had been with a C-130 squadron when I was originally at DICE as a young flight surgeon, they were going at a rate of 4 months on, 4 months off. And so that was a lot of moving parts. But for most part, it's usually 6-month deployments in the Air Force. And usually they try not to tap you too terrible often, but you'll definitely expect to go a few times.
So as a flight surgeon, how much of a say do you have in where you want to go? Is there a lot of base locations you have the choice of, or you just get thrown into your one squadron right off the bat, and then you're with them for a long time?
So yes, you have some say. That being said, I think my first dream sheet had 20 things on it, and the 6 options I was given, none of them were on that dream sheet. So that being said, I've discovered that there's a lot of good to be found in a lot of locations. It depends on what you make of it and who you're there with. I thought that going to DICE Air Force Base in Abilene, Texas was going to be just the armpit of the earth, and it's probably one of my favorite assignments ever. So that being said, as a flight doc, you're probably going to move about every 3 to 4 years. Homesteading used to happen. They tried that with the docs for a while to let you set up shop and really be somewhere for like 7 or 8 years. And it just didn't meet the needs of the Air Force. And so they don't really do that anymore. But it's been good. And it's going to be a transition for our family here. This is the first time we've lived somewhere for 3 years, and we're not packing a moving truck in the next 6 months. So it's going to be a change in pace for sure.
So you just mentioned family, and that brings me actually to the next question. Is being a flight surgeon a good job for wanting to start a family? Because a lot of people, when they choose what they want to do, go in with that focus and that mindset. Is this going to be okay for the family, having kids, going through school, and all that stuff?
Absolutely. I think being a flight surgeon is going to be equivocal with any officer in the Air Force who's looking to stay in more than just maybe a short tour. If you're looking to stay in for several tours for a career, it is a good thing. You are going to, we've talked about the moving. So that can be hard on spouses. That can be hard on older kids. I'll tell you now, as voice of experience, have kids, no matter what you do, no matter who you are. But having kids as a flight surgeon has been good for me and good for our family.
So you mentioned a little bit earlier that you're in your terminal leave right now and you're transitioning to guard. What's your career going to look like once you transition to the guard? Are you doing anything in the civilian sector as well, or you're strictly just doing active stuff with the guard?
That is a fabulous question. For the first time in my adult life, I am currently looking for a job. Which is something that you don't think about when you're in the Air Force, because they'll give you one, whether you want it or not is another story, but there's always a job for them to give you. So I am currently looking. I am looking at some GS positions to no kidding work a day job doing old school flight medicine on a base, just not wearing the uniform. I'm looking to do just traditional guardsman work for now, but I'd be open for a position in the guard if they had a more full-time position. I'm open to options right now. And the fun thing with being boarded in aerospace medicine, yes, it all applies to the military stuff, but then there are FAA jobs. And with the coming proliferation of all the civilian space, we've got SpaceX, we've got a lot of folks out here in Southwest Texas, and they need flight surgeons. They need people who understand, again, putting healthy humans, or even as we're sending civilians, maybe not so healthy humans, into abnormal environments and helping keep them safe and be able to get the mission or get whatever done. So there's a lot to be had. It's a really good time if folks are interested in aerospace medicine. And this is the golden era for the first time since the 60s. So it's exciting stuff.
And are there plenty of resources out there helping you through this transition into the civilian world? Or are you kind of on your own trying to find a job?
There's good resources. Actually, I was very impressed. There's a lot of mandatory training and mandatory receipt of information that the military has you do. A lot of it's even congressionally mandated. So you're given the tools, and it does make it more comfortable. But at the same time, it's like walking away from a long-term relationship. I've been in the Air Force ever since I was, fresh out of college when I took that scholarship, and I went fresh to college right out of high school. So like the Air Force have been essentially my secondary parents for the last 15 years. And suddenly it's, oh, I I get to make decisions on my own now. Well, that's neat.
And you mentioned you have kids. That's correct, right?
Yes, I have two.
How old are they?
I have a 5-year-old and a 5-month-old. So a little bit of a split there.
My question was going to be, are they looking into the Air Force? But I think it's a little too young before they start thinking about it.
My 5-year-old will probably tell you that I think he still wants to be a construction worker, but occasionally fighter pilot comes up on the list, especially if his daddy lets him sit down and watch Top Gun with him. So as long as he goes the Air Force way and doesn't become a Navy fighter pilot, I'll be fine.
I agree. So you mentioned you're currently working with Air Education Training Command, and also through your email, you mentioned you have a lot of insight to flight physicals and commissioning physicals and that whole medical process. And we have a lot of cadets that are interested in rated positions and also just commissioning that would definitely love to hear a little bit about your insight into some of this process that they know nothing about right now.
Fair enough. So I don't work in the direct division. I'll preface, I don't work in the division, the accession medical waiver division who processes these, but I do know a little about it because once people are actually assessed into the Air Force, if they need waivers and additional physicals, that comes through my division. Commissioning and really commissioning or initial flying or rated exams all have to meet a certain standard for actual coming into the Air Force. So for a session itself, those standards, those bars are set higher than the ones to keep people in the Air Force. And if you think about it, it makes sense because I want to set the bar high. I want the cream of the crop to come in. And then if I've already trained them and spent a bunch of money on them and they're a little broken, I can make that work. But, we say, if you can't see the color green, I really don't think it's a good idea to bring you in and say, let's put you in a slot to fly an airplane that has green and red readouts in it. That's a bad plan from the start. That's not a good investment. It's not good business on the Air Force's part. So there's some of that at foot, and we're trying on the whole with medical standards to make that a little more evident to folks, to make it, hey, we're not just being big meanies up here. There are operational reasons for everything we have. If you puff up like a puffer fish every time you touch a peanut, probably don't want to send you down range where you might only get MREs, which I guarantee you there's peanut butter in at least 50% of those MREs, or stuff like that. So I guess if there's one thing I could distill down to, there is reasoning behind our medical standards, and we always want to say yes. And we have a whole division of people who are really good at reviewing and seeing when we need to recommend waivers, and we have full processes for that. It's not a dartboard, I promise. We actually have full procedures and algorithms that we go through for a lot of medical conditions. And we want to give the Air Force the best product, and we want to obviously let as many people serve as can, but within reason and using good risk judgment.
Yeah, so a follow-up question about these standards. A big focus of modern day is mental health. And I think there's a lot of people who are suffering with mental health things that want to join the military. Maybe they're a third, fourth year in ROTC, but they don't want to get kicked out. They don't want to get told no. How do we deal with people that are going through these with the waiver process? Do you find that if they get help, they still have a chance at serving? But is there anything you could demystify about that process for cadets maybe hiding some of this stuff?
Yes, absolutely. First and foremost, getting help, taking care of your mental, physical well-being is going to be paramount, no matter whether you're going to serve in the Air Force or whether you're going to just be another functional member of society. And this will be the part where I do put on my doctor first hat here and say, take good care of yourselves. When it comes to getting, especially accession waivers and flying waivers for mental health conditions, whether or not you were treated with psychotherapy, whether or not you were treated with medications, one of the biggest factors is going to be time sense. So say that you had some really rough stuff going on in your life when you were 16, you saw a therapist for a while, you took some antidepressants for a while, you got off of those, you've been off of them now and functioning well in college for the last 3 years. That story sounds a lot better and a lot more plausible. Obviously, you're still going to need to go see a mental health person to say, yeah, no, Timmy's doing great right now. He had a rough time there. He took these medicines. He stopped taking these medicines. He's been very stable. That's the kind of thing we like to see. We like to see periods of stability. We like to see, folks can have a hard time. Obviously, if something more severe of, well, Timmy had 3 suicide attempts, and oh, by the way, the last one was just 6 months ago. That's not giving me a picture of stability that makes me feel warm and fuzzy about giving Timmy a really stressful job and going through Air Force training right now. Am I saying that Timmy can never? No, not necessarily. There's not a whole lot of hard, fast never, but the worse that something might have been, or the more treatment you might have received, means you may need a little more time and distance between you and that before it's time to take on a really big life stressor like joining the military.
And a little follow up, how does the medical standards view therapy? If you go to therapy, not because you're diagnosed with anything, but you're just going through a rough time and you need help, is there anything wrong with that? Or as long as you're not diagnosed with anything, therapy is completely fine?
Absolutely. Therapy, and any other kind of, just like going to yoga class, it's another thing to help strengthen your body and mind. And so going and seeking that without having a diagnosis is totally fair, and something that we look well upon. Obviously, we're gonna, at least if we know, we're gonna ask the question of, hey, was there anything big going on? And okay, good to know. Glad you got through that. Glad you got help. And the same thing, even when you're on active duty, we encourage people to utilize mental health resources. We have some both within the military health system, and then we have stuff out in the community that we've liaised with the community to be able to give people wide options, because we want people to get help. At the end of the day, the worst thing in the world is somebody that doesn't, and we get a tragic outcome because of it.
Yeah, I appreciate you clarifying some stuff on that because I know a lot of people they're definitely scared to go to therapy while in ROTC and trying to join the military because they think it will be something that disqualifies you. But getting help is not something that disqualifies you, and it should be something that's encouraged. So I appreciate you
Absolutely.
clarifying that. So I covered all the topics that I personally wanted to cover, but now we actually have some cadet questions that we gathered over the last week or two. So this one's a little bit about yourself, but what piqued your interest in medicine, and when did you know you were interested in medicine?
So I'm not your typical, like, I was not the kid that knew from the time I was 4 years old that I wanted to be a doctor. I always got the, oh, you're really smart, you should be a doctor or a lawyer. Yes, we all get that if we make good grades in school and we behave ourselves. For me, it really wasn't until like high school that I started getting interested. We dissected the notorious ninth grade biology frog, and I was like, wow, well, this is cool. And so kind of started to entertain the idea down the road a little further, even into college when I was still, well, I think this is what I want to do. I got to go take a rotation down to what actually would become my medical school, the University of Texas Medical Branch in Galveston, and had a connection there in the pathology department and got to see my first autopsy. And that was wicked cool. And from then on, I was excited and ready. Now, what's fun and looking back, it's never make plans too far in advance, because the good Lord's going to laugh at you. I was bound and determined when I went to medical school that I was going to be a pediatrician. And then about 6 months in, I realized I loved, again, we should have seen this coming with the whole frog thing, loved cutting things open, love exploring the body. And so really looked at doing surgery. So I was gung ho. I was going to do plastic and reconstructive surgery. We had a big burn hospital at my med school. And then the Air Force said, well, that's not the needs of the Air Force. And you signed up for the Air Force. So I was offered to do general surgery, which I did not want to do. That was a long and 5-year grueling path that I knew would result in lots of hours in the hospital, lots of unpleasant deployments, by my stretched imagination and for what I wanted for my family. So I tried out this flight medicine thing really begrudgingly, y'all. I did not want to be a flight doc, and I was mad, and I was going to serve my 4, and I was going to get out and go be a surgeon. And sure enough, fell in love with it. Love working with my fellow officers, love working with the line, love working with pilots. And yeah, it was the right fit for me, but definitely not one I saw coming.
And when you chose the medicine route, the medical route, what made you go with the military? Was it because the opportunity to pay for med school, or was there other interests and motive?
So paying for med school obviously is a great deal. It doesn't take too much, reading about student debt these days, and med school debt was colossal even when I went through over a decade ago. For me, there was always a desire to serve. I'm going to put a date on myself here. I was very little, but I remember Desert Storm 1 and when that happened. And I remember the gravity of the situation wasn't lost on me, even as a kindergartner. I think that's what I was. And I remember thinking, wow, I want to do something like that one day. I want to help people like that. Both my grandfathers served, my parents didn't. So I'm not a military brat, but my grandfathers had served, one of them in World War II. So we had some history in the family, and I felt like it was something I wanted to do. I just wasn't sure how it fit into my life. And so when the health profession scholarship came along, that clicked as just the right thing, and how I managed to get both military and medicine to be a pathway together for me.
Yeah, so that's awesome. So the next question is, because you mentioned you work with civilian as well. How would you describe the difference between being a military medical professional versus a civilian one?
Differences in military and civilian medicine practice?
Yep.
Okay, so definitely some differences. There's, as we've talked on earlier, there's the whole officer step approach of, you're not only here to be a doctor, you're not only here to be the medical team, but you're here to be officers, to lead, to be a part of the military organization. You're not going to see that as much on the outside. Civilian medicine is different in that fact. And I'll tell you, it's a good and a bad thing. Sometimes I laugh because I'll go to a civilian medical conference and everybody calls me doctor and are real kind of nice to me. And I forget that I'm not just Major Nelms, who sometimes feels like another cog in the wheel in the military, because let's face it, sometimes in a large organization, that's what you're going to feel like. So there's differences. One of the wonderful things about practicing in the military is your malpractice is covered. All the inner workings of the background paperwork and credentialing, you are largely helped out with, and you don't pay for any of that. It's just part of the business, and you show up and you get to do the job, and you don't worry about that like you would if you were a sole practitioner out in the community, or if you were working for a hospital system, you'd have to play by their rules. So there's differences. I can tell you that the biggest thing I'm going to miss leaving military medicine is the camaraderie, especially with my air crew. I think military flight medicine, I'm gonna wax poetic here for a minute, is the final frontier of the old country doctor. And hear me out. So if you were in a small town, you had the one doctor and everybody knew the doctor and everybody knew how to get a hold of the doctor. You may not have even had telephones back then, but everybody knew. And they called the doctor for everything, including things that didn't have to do with medicine, like the cow is having a baby and something's going wrong. Call the doctor. And so that's been one of the best things, is building those relationships with my air crew. When I'm at a base, all my air crew have my cell phone number. Even if I'm not on call, hey, my personal favorites, of course, are I did something and my wife says I have to go to the ER and I don't think I have to. Doc, you have to settle this for us. And so I fielded many of those calls. I have stitched up friends and air crews' dogs. It's just that family unit, and they don't abuse that, and they love you for it because you're available to them and they know they can trust you. And that is something that doesn't exist, I don't think, in civilian medicine anymore. There's not that depth of doctor-patient relationship and being able to have that trust with one another. Because I have the same trust with them when I step to the aircraft with them. I have to trust them to be good at what they do and not kill me with their airplane today. And so it's a really cool relationship, and that is arguably the best thing about being a flight surgeon and practicing medicine in the military.
That's some awesome stuff. So we have a couple cadets at our detachment that are interested in special forces, more specifically combat rescue officer. And they're curious, what is the difference in medical knowledge between a crow and a flight nurse? And what are the similarities as well?
So a crow is they're going to get some pretty good, like, paramedic style knowledge. A lot of it is going to be at the point of injury, no kidding, being able to stabilize, package somebody up. Past that, treatment is not really something that you're going to see a whole lot, because their goal is to get that person packaged on something, probably a rotary wing or a Jeep, get them to somewhere where there's a little more stability and there's an actual medic. A nurse, of course, is going to have gone to nursing school. And so they're going to have a certain set of skills. And then usually, sometimes in the field, actually, and Special Forces does have doctors that work with them. So huge plug for that. And a lot of them are flight surgeons. but a doc is going to have just that much higher echelon of care. You've gone to 4 years of medical school. You've probably gone to 3 to 5 years of residency training on top of that. So just the sheer knowledge and experience that you have is going to be very different. That being said, and I will fully admit I've not deployed with special forces. I've not worked a whole lot with them, but it's the combat rescue officers definitely have a very special set of skills and are a very vital part of the team. But it's definitely going to be more operationally focused, and they're not, as far as I know, and I'm not going to say this 100%. They're not going to have any kind of Geneva Convention protections like a medical officer would. They are a combatant first and foremost. They also just happen to have medical skills beyond the standard combatant. Hopefully that makes sense.
Yep, I think that was pretty clear. The next question is relating to a cadet who I presume is trying to go rated or into the pilot field. And they were wondering about G's and preparing for that. Is that something they can train, do extra cardio, do extra strength training to get used to it? Or is it something they just got to show up and just embrace the process?
So science answer is if that cadet is lucky, they're built like Dr. Booster over here, and they're real short, and the distance between their eyeballs and their brain and their heart is really short. Because at the end of the day, when you get put under a big G load, and y'all probably all seen videos of centrifuges and stuff, when you get put under that big G load, the blood in your body is not able to return to your heart and return to your brain. And so that's how you lose vision and then eventually lose consciousness if you're not able to keep that blood pressure up. So being short is helpful. You'll hear people say, oh, they're built for G's. But things you can do, and in the aircraft, what you do is called an anti-G straining maneuver, which is basically tensing all the large muscle sets, so your glutes, your abs, your quads, and pushing against that blood and keeping it up in the top half of your body. So cardio is good because you need to have endurance, but definitely lower leg strengthening, core strengthening, those things are going to really help you so that when you are pulling those G's and you are having to do that G strain maneuver repeatedly, that your body's ready for that.
So we got one more cadet question here before we wrap things up. This one's related to the MCAT. I'm not sure if you've personally taken it, but so I guess the question is, have you taken the MCAT, and do you have any tips for people who are studying or aspiring to take it?
Yes. So the MCAT is the medical admissions test, if you will, for medical school. So everybody that wants to go to medical school has to take it. I definitely recommend, I'm going to tell you, this is going to be the learning by fire, take a prep course. I don't care which one. I don't work for any of them, and I won't get a kickback even if I did. But take a prep course because it's going to help you stay organized and to help you analyze where your weaknesses are so that you can better focus. I won't lie. I was cavalier and I read through my general chemistry book and just took the test. And I did okay. But it's a good thing I didn't want to go to Harvard. We'll put it that way. So yeah, take a prep course and let that be an organized thing for you to help you structure the way you study, and you're going to do great.
Great. So that was all the cadet questions we have. So the last, I suppose, question is any pieces of advice or last comments on people who might be interested in flight nurse, flight surgeon, the medical field, or anything like that?
I think really just obviously, you gotta make some level of grades, but a lot of it, especially in the military, is working hard and being a good part of the team. Because not everybody's going to have all the strengths, and so a willingness to learn from others, whether they are your fellow officers, whether they are your enlisted staff, and to play well with the team, even when folks are different than you. Learning as a doctor to play nice with the pilots, to play nice with the loggies. Those are the things that are going to set you up for success, whether you're in flight medicine, whether you're in another field, whether you're rated or not. And ultimately, even when you leave the military, having those skill sets is something that you can only learn in an organization like the United States Air Force. So yeah, study hard, but have fun. That's basically it.
Yeah, well, that's all we got. So thank you so much, Major Nelms, for joining us today. Thank you, everyone, for listening. And we'll see you next time on the Detachment 538 podcast.